So today's presentation is going to be making good on your transparency promises. And when we're talking about this, if you're in government or the public sector work, you're usually under the public eye of making sure that any of the construction spending and the work that you do is meeting up the standards and the demands of your community. And whether you want to maintain trust for local bond approval and local bond voting, or if you're getting federal funds or state funds and you need to be able to follow guidelines or regulations and have an audit trail showing how things are moving on your construction processes, you want to make sure that you have those things in play, and so that way you're not the guy behind the curtain there. You're fully transparent with everything that's going on. And so with that being said, I've got Luke Van Santen here with MetCouncil in Minnesota with us today, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to him.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Chris said, my name is Luke Van Santen. I'm the eBuilder administrator here for the Metropolitan Council account in the Minneapolis and St. Paul metropolitan area. And as you can all probably recall, you've heard a story recently, or maybe not so recently, hopefully, about the government blowing it again, how it just lands in the paper and it blows up and everybody shakes their head about how poorly things were done. Hopefully what we talk about today can show you ways that you can minimize the likelihood of that happening to you. We've been relatively successful with it here, thanks in large part to the functionalities that the eBuilder technology offers. Just to go over a couple things more about me, as I mentioned, I'm the eBuilder system administrator for the light rail transit project offices here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. We implemented eBuilder in 2010 on our second light rail transit project, formerly known as the Central Corridor project. Now it's the Green Line. That was at the time the largest public works project in the history of Minnesota at just under $1 billion. We're now currently in the late design phases of two additional light rail transit projects named the Botno LRT or Blue Line extension and the Southwest LRT or Green Line extension. Completion of these two projects would bring the overall LRT branch count in the metropolitan area here to 4, even though the two recent ones are considered to be extensions of the two existing ones. The two projects currently underway, as I mentioned, the Botno project and Southwest, have a total program worth roughly $3.3 billion, and we are working amazingly hard to make sure that that number doesn't change up. So when we started using, or actually before we started using eBuilder on the Central Corridor project, we faced some of the same challenges that governments everywhere face. How do we get a handle on all of the different pieces of data we have? Everyone's familiar with using their email system, and everybody can run a spreadsheet pretty well, and everybody is totally familiar using files and folder structures to store data. But when you compare what you do with the project manager in the next cube over and the project manager at the office down the street, every one of you has little differences that crop up. When you add in different contractors and different project management agencies or other state agencies, it gets really hard to scale, if not impossible, to address all of the tracking needs across all of those slightly different or largely different systems. So we put out a RFP, and through that whole process resulted in implementing eBuilder so we could try and address the confusion and the trouble and the headache that's represented in the before image here on your screens by putting all of our work efforts like RFIs, requests for information, into very structured workflows. When we first implemented, we maybe weren't as aware of all of the capabilities that eBuilder offered as we are now. So we started off using kind of an extension of our previous methods, the folder structures in eBuilder. And while that worked reasonably well, it maybe wasn't as good as a process is in the system. eBuilder, in that way, with the folder structures, did offer us several solutions to the goals we were seeking. It gave us a great single location for all of our important documentation. That was our centralized documentation. It gave us a way to tell what we had and where it is, so we could report on everything. It also enabled us to be much more consistent. I mentioned the small differences or even the large differences between project managers on an earlier slide. And by having things in one system using standard workflows, we could be a lot more consistent. We were also able to, in a much better way, store information relating to context. For example, why did that particular change order go around 3 times, and why did it change so much? So, as I kind of touched on a little bit before, we implemented eBuilder, and we're really happy with the level of centralized documentation that we got right off the bat. We were able to minimize all of the problems we had with our emails and spreadsheets and files by having them in one particular place. As we continued to grow within eBuilder, though, we began to recognize some things that we thought might give us a better leg to stand on with respect to our funding partners and our auditors. And we, over time, moved to almost exclusively use processes in eBuilder. The reasons we did that were because even though documents are good, data is way better. To illustrate that point, if you can imagine an RFI folder with 20 items in it, and they're all named slightly differently, but you have to pop into each one and see where it is in the overall process in order to get an understanding of what your status is. Now imagine doing that for 20 RFIs and then going to your next project and having 10 more there. By using data instead of documents, we're able to automate that monitoring and get a much better insight into what our status is. We also moved from some of the out-of-the-box functionality to more of a custom functionality that the processes module offers. An example there is we started out using submittals, and for various reasons decided that we would prefer to have something we could tweak and modify as need be. So we built our own submittals process. And underlying all of this discussion about processes, of course, especially with respect to the focus of today's talk, is the fact that processes maintain a history of every action and every data change that's been made to an instance, even including when comments are made or when files are attached. And that gave us a great audit trail that we could use then to show that we're following our procedures and everything is above board, so we don't end up being that guy behind the curtain.
So Luke, that sounds like, I mean, this is a really key part of it here in maintaining that transparency. I mean, when you just had Word documents or Excel spreadsheets before, I mean, it was really hard for your team to mine the project status or project cost and different information, especially amongst many project managers and many projects. So as you start implementing these processes where data is actually put into forms and a database, consistently across projects, this sounds like it's really key to keeping track of everything.
It really is. It really facilitated us getting a much better handle on things, and it wasn't like we had to implement everything all at once. We grabbed the low-hanging fruit, like RFIs and maybe some nonconformance reports were put in first, and then we said, well, let's do some submittals and add change orders. Before you know it, we've got over 100 process types that's really, and they're all facilitating the different phases of our projects as we move through design and on into construction. One of our other goals in pursuing a project management solution was to increase our ability to report on items. We wanted to be able to identify where bottlenecks were and understand just how well, or unfortunately sometimes how poorly, we were performing on certain things. Before we implemented eBuilder, we had kind of the document-based, pieces of paper in a little red folder that were literally carried to various people's desks. And when we got all of the different approvals and signatures from the project office, those packets of paper then basically went over the wall, and we lost all ability to understand where they were in the process from then on. So when we switched to having our invoices tracked through a process in eBuilder and basing a lot of this stuff on data instead of actual document, we can completely monitor and report on automatically how we're doing within the process. And as the images here show, we can do a nice bit of color coding to give you that real dashboard pop that says, hey, these two invoices on the advanced design project have been in this particular, or their overall process age, is over 8 days. And given we only have 30 days to get these things paid, we need to really focus on those. Having this level of data available also then gives us, through the history reporting in eBuilder, the capability to say, okay, we know that this particular step takes on average about a day and a half. So when we look at our report and say, oh, for the month of April, that same step actually was taking about 4 days, we can dig into it and either take steps to supplement our forces to make sure we can get these things handled correctly, or we can maybe even address the workflow and change any underlying bottlenecks in it. And one of the things that's resulted from this increased level of data that we have available to us is that we've been able to increase the number of invoices that do get paid within 30 days. That in turn, when we're in the construction phase, really made our contractors happy, because they're kind of caught in the middle between us not wanting to release money too soon and their subs saying, hey, we did this work for you and we haven't been paid yet. It's been 10 days or 15 days. What's going on? So by contractor getting paid within 30 days, they're able to minimize that level of stress on their own side. We were also able to achieve one of the goals we had in mind towards consistency by implementing processes. This is a graphical view straight out of our eBuilder account of the workflow associated with our invoice process. By putting it in eBuilder like this, we were able to eliminate any extra steps, resulting in a much streamlined process. So the person who received the invoice, for example, wouldn't say, I know I'm supposed to send it to this person within 2 days, but I just want to get a quick bit of info from this other person, and before you know it, it's been 3 days and now things are late just from the get-go. It also makes sure that we are able to have the right person looking at something at the right time, both by using escalation alerts on the steps in this process, as well as automated report subscriptions that give us a quick snapshot of how long things have been in certain steps. We know that we're getting the time right. We also know through the role membership that we can control in eBuilder that it's the right person, not somebody who shouldn't be looking at it. So instead of having to rely on our project managers going through some sort of training and being brought up to speed all the same way, we can take care of that here. So essentially, once we've talked with our project managers and gotten all of their good ideas and their tips and tricks and their expertise, we can build it in here and bring everybody up to that same level. Doing that really prevents errors and makes things go a lot smoother. And not to pounding on this, but given the topic that we're here to talk about today, making sure that we're transparent, having things set up as a process like this gives you a completely automated audit trail. So you can really make sure that things go smoothly when that dreaded audit does happen.
So Luke, that picture that we're seeing there on the screen, that's actually one of your processes, right?
It is. We've set it up to be as universally applicable and as project specific all at the same time as we can. And it's working really well. We get people in the right roles and things just kind of cruise right through.
So it's not just like a PDF or a piece of paper, like a Visio diagram. Like that actually is where you're able to configure the different people there. So all of the logic, like you're seeing there, is set up graphically, and then you can save that and apply that to different forms or different entry for different people on your projects, right? That's all something you can configure, right?
Yep, all of that knowledge, just like the bullet says, all of that knowledge is then built right into the system and totally accessible to any user of this process type. We don't have to rely on that old, well, Jimmy says this is the best way to do it, and having that trickle around the circle of project managers. Everybody gets to see the right way to do it just from the get-go by having it built and configured here. The last thing we were really focused on in terms of pursuing a solution were being able to illustrate context. And by that, we wanted to capture as much, if not all, of the supporting information as we could. So one of the ways we've done that is kind of captured in this screenshot. We make sure that people enter comments about why they're doing what they're doing. Sometimes a mere text narrative comment isn't adequate to provide a full context, but they're able to either attach documents or make links to other process instances and really provide that richer picture. So when the auditors do come calling, instead of giving them a spreadsheet or a PDF that says these are the things we've done and here's the results, you have this real deep pool of information they can dive into and get all of their answers much more easily than by sitting with you at your desk and going over items one at a time. And we do that in large part because it's the right thing to do, but also because, just like our new friend here in the lower left corner, we don't want to be seeing our picture splashed on the front of the paper. There's kind of three levels to the whole what if. The first level is you handle all your context and all your processes just right and everything's smooth and the auditors are happy. There's a second level where, oh crap, we didn't manage to capture them. So the auditor makes a finding, and before you know it, the local newspaper says, here's just another example, government blowing it again. And the third level of that is the one that nobody ever wants to face, where either through a newspaper article or through audits from federal funding partners or whatever combination of information, one of your funding partners decides to say, I just don't have confidence in what you're doing anymore, and I'm going to pull my funding. And before you know it, you're all out on the street, and things aren't happy anymore. So being able to provide this level of context really helps us stay away from either the bad pictures, the bad articles in the paper, and much further away even than losing funding. We did have, as you can imagine, a couple of unintended consequences from doing all of this work to update our business processes. In our opinion, both of them were actually quite good consequences. They weren't bad outcomes. The first one is that we were now able to much more easily, through the apps that are available for free, access all of our eBuilder process information in the field from tablets and or phones. This ended up saving and will end up saving our field staff a good bit of time because they can just immediately reply to an RFI while they're out in the field, or they can take a picture of some non-conforming condition and have that into the system and being addressed before they even get back to the office. We also were able to take advantage of some of the automation capabilities within the processes module and achieve a nicely enhanced bit of archiving. And to describe that a little bit more, I don't know if other agencies or other listeners out there have similar conditions to us where your company has its own specific corporate document retention system. You know, in some cases, I imagine that might actually be eBuilder, so this is maybe a moot point for you. But for those cases where, like us, you do have a completely separate document retention system, getting information out and into that other system is very much facilitated through use of the processes module. So in summary, we had some challenges. Things were stored everywhere and nowhere. Not everything was done the same way. We were a little bit inconsistent, and we weren't always able to provide all of the background information that some of our auditors wanted. But by going with eBuilder, we were able to achieve all 4 of our goals in centralized documentation, reportability, standardized processes, and context, and to do so relatively quickly and definitely with a minimum of pain. As you can see from the bullets, I don't want to necessarily just read these. We do have, through the centralized documentation capabilities of eBuilder, one source of truth, one place where people can come see all of the information. And that is dependent or controllable, or however you want to look at it, on the permissions that the various people have. We're also able to control their access to data with support from documents and achieve consistency in knowing why things happened. So, with that being the case, I imagine Chris will be jumping on here in a quick second, but before he does, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you to eBuilder for giving me the opportunity to have this little discussion, and I'll pass it back over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Luke, and I'll actually give you a shout out as well. Luke is one of our most active and contributors to our online community, and so that's one of the great things, and sharing information and ideas and different ways of improving processes, especially with like-minded organizations. So Luke, thank you very much. First question on the panel here is basically how is it that you guys or describe the process of how you got approval to bring eBuilder into your organization?
I think our story for getting eBuilder is maybe a little bit easier than most. We had the very first LRT, light rail transit project that we had was called Hiawatha, and we had a different project management system in use on that project. That proceeded reasonably well. That was, I think, 15 plus years ago, so the technology was certainly less advanced. But when that project finished and we moved on to the next one, that system kind of came with and was set up in maybe a slightly different way, and it ended up not working near as well as it had before. So management, senior management, when that second project wrapped up, said, okay, we know we need a project management system because we like the functionality we've seen, but the one we have now is outdated and it's not implemented well. So please go out and see first if there is a system that is more advanced, more current, more modern, and then bring back what you find and make recommendations to us on which ones are the best. So that's exactly what we did, and we really, kudos to our senior management for seeing the need. We really didn't have to pitch too hard to say, hey, we need a system. We just had to prove that the system we were recommending was the best available. And that's exactly what we did and ended up going with eBuilder.
All right, Luke, let's see. Next question on the panel here is, how easy was it to actually get your contractors engaged in using the software with you?
So when we first implemented in April of 2010, we had 2 smaller construction contracts underway, and we made pretty strong efforts to get those 2 contractors involved, and they unfortunately, in our opinion, they both declined for various reasons. So after that, we went back to the drawing board a little bit and said, okay, we are going to include requirements in our contract documents that the contractor participate in our system. Now, we could do that and just leave it up to them to contact eBuilder for training and, bill us back, but we also provided, and I'm only a little biased when I say this, a pretty high level of support and training for all of the contractor, subcontractor, other external stakeholder, who have, you name it, whoever was going to use the system. We gave them a pretty good level of training and a very good level of support, so it was easy for them to swallow that pill, I guess you could say, of us dictating that they were going to use the system.
All right. Doesn't look like we've got any other questions here. So again, Luke, I appreciate you being on with us today and all of the attendees. And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.
Take care, y'all.